Hey guys, my name's Jenna, and if you're new here, my husband and I spent the last couple of years making our home in North Carolina our dream space, but we couldn't ignore the nudge to move back to Arizona where we had originally moved from. So we packed up all of our belongings and headed back across the country on a week-long road trip where we made some fun stops along the way. And once we arrived in Arizona, we got settled into our temporary rental, and we had so much fun making that space match our style and giving it a cozier vibe. And while we were there, we kept an eye out for our dream home, which we had been looking for years at this point, and honestly we were starting to lose hope that we would find anything that excited us until we toured this one home. We immediately fell in love with the mountain views and recognized all of the potential that this place had. The only problem was that it needed a lot of work. I'm pretty sure the house hadn't been touched cosmetically since it was built, so we had our work cut out for us, especially since we're working with a limited budget, but the views and the bones are what sold us. So follow along as we renovate and turn this house into our dream home. Okay, so in last week's video, I showed you all how we came up with a temporary backsplash solution that was affordable by lime washing our kitchen to add some depth and texture. And this week, we were focused on adding the rustic beam to the range hood, as well as adding a mantle to our fireplace. So for this project, we worked through our contractor, Al at Tanner Materials, and he sent over Marco and Miguel, who were a talented father and son duo who so graciously allowed me to film them as they worked. So if you all remember, I found this awesome Etsy shop where you can buy old distressed barn beams, and we ended up purchasing 2 of them to help infuse some rustic character into our space. And we had to get a little creative because I wanted to wrap the beam around the wall for a more seamless look, and the beam that we had purchased was just a little bit too short. So the solution we came up with was to borrow some pieces from the kitchen hood beam. So what they ended up doing was cutting 1.5 inches off of my favorite side of the beam, and then they measured those pieces and cut them down to size with mitered edges, and then securely attached those to the framing of the hood. And I was so excited to see this piece go up to finish off our beautiful range hood, which I designed to be the main focal piece on this wall. And I just loved all of the rustic hand-hewn detail that it had, and it's small elements like this that help to give the design of this home so much character and depth. So I was really excited to see it go up, and I just love that this piece of wood sat for years in a barn somewhere, and now it gets a second life in our home. The only issue that we ran into was because of the organic shape and texture of the beam, the mitered corner ended up looking a little bit awkward. So the solution that we came up with was to take a piece of one of the scraps and just chisel out one of these hand-hewn marks and then patch that over the area and just disguise it. And honestly, the guys did such a great job with this. You cannot even tell that the added piece isn't naturally a part of the beam. So I was glad they were able to make it look a little bit more seamless. So next it was time for the mantle beam, and as you can see, some sides of the beam were better to use than others, so we had to be really careful about the measurements and what side of the beam would face the front of the room and just the orientation of everything. And then once we decided on that, the guys put up this temporary brace and then traced the outline of the beam, and this is just because it wasn't super straight. It had more of an organic shape, so this would make the patching easier later on. So once the outline was all traced, they went in and cut out the piece of drywall where the beam would go, and then they did a little test fit just to make sure everything looked good, and then they went ahead and cut the beam. And this is what the corners looked like since we would be wrapping the sides around the mantle. This is kind of like the cut shape that they decided to do. And the reason we hired this out is because Mike and I are definitely more on the novice side when it comes to woodworking, and I'm sure we could have figured out a plan, but because we only had 2 of the barn beams, we really didn't want to risk messing anything up, especially since these will be the focal pieces in each room. And we were really glad that we did hire this out because they did a phenomenal job, and they did a lot of things that Mike and I would not have thought to do or been able to do with our current equipment. So they ended up having to take some more drywall off of the bottom so that they could have room to screw in the brackets. And they had previously secured the brackets onto the beam before they hoisted it into place, so then all they had to do was screw them into the framing studs afterwards. And because this beam beam was so heavy. I was a little concerned about how secure it would be, and Miguel told Marco to hang off of it with his full body weight to prove to me that it was definitely on there nice and secure. So that made me feel good. And then the last thing that they had to do was attach the other two side pieces, because I thought that if the beam wrapped around the sides of the wall, it would look a lot more naturally integrated and intentionally incorporated into the architecture versus just a beam that was cut off on both ends. Okay, so it's the next morning and this is what it looks like, all with the sides attached. I was actually really worried because we had to borrow some from the beam from our hood because they were two separate beams, because this one wasn't long enough to wrap around, and I was worried about them being a different color and a different size, but honestly, you can barely tell. It looks pretty seamless in my opinion for it being from a totally different beam. And they did have some drywall repair here from that part they took out, so they're coming back to sand that down today. But this is the other side. I was really happy with how this turned out. I just love how this adds so much warmth and texture to this space, and it really just looks like an authentic architectural detail that's been worked into this home and has been here for years. Okay, so actually it does seem like I might have a couple of days to try to take these doors off and sand down this part that is inside. We can at least do the doors in the garage, but this stuff needs to be sanded down obviously in the house. So I really want to get that done before we move in. So I'm going to try to do that really quickly. So the first thing that I did was put a little piece of painter's tape on each cabinet door and drawer to label where they go. So that way it would be super simple to put them back when I was done. And after I had them all labeled, I just removed all of the drawers and doors so that we could sand the edges of the cabinet boxes. And we used a sheet sander and did succession sanding. So this is basically where you sand the wood in a sequence of different grits, starting from the coarsest and then working your way up to the fine grit sandpaper. So we started with 80 grit, and then we did 150 grit, and then 220 grit. So this just helps to thoroughly remove all of the finish and basically kind of polishes the wood so that it will accept stain better. And as you can imagine, this was very time consuming. So we would work on this throughout the day, on the weekend, and then we would come back home after work during the week to try to get some more done before we moved in. Okay, so the orange cabinets are officially gone. We have majority of everything all sanded off, which feels so good. I spent majority of my day today sanding this top molding piece, and it was awful. It took forever. There were probably way better ways to do it, but hand sanding was just what I ended up doing. And this is, for reference, what it looked like before. I'm not sure if we're gonna pop those little corner pieces off or if Mike is just gonna hit it with the orbital sander when he gets off of work. He also has to do the toe kick down here, but for the most part, we are orange free, which feels really good. And this right here is the reason that we were rushing to get it done before we move in. It just gets all over everything. It's such a messy project. As you can see, it just carries and gets on everything. So it's nice that the messy part of the project is over with now. We're gonna clean up, and then we actually have to get over to the other house to move because we have to be out of the other house. But I'm just happy that the messy part is done, but we definitely have a lot of cleanup ahead of us because this place looks awful. So we're gonna get to cleaning, and then we gotta go over and move all of our stuff in. So I did just wanna show that while Mike was sanding, I decided to use that time to go out and test some stains. And I had heard a lot of good things about general finishes, and I also wanted to try a water-based stain that you can get mixed at the paint counter. So in order to test the stains, I needed to take the finish off of this cabinet door. So I used this Jazzco paint and epoxy remover, and I have used similar chemical finish removers in the past, but they do get very messy, and in some cases you just have to wrap them in plastic and let them sit overnight for them to fully work. And I was just not happy with how this was turning out, so I ended up having Mike come over and help me remove the finish with his sander. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, we hit a very disappointing snag when it came to the cabinet doors. We tried to sand them down so I could test some stains, and when we were sanding them, we realized that this corner piece is actually veneer. So we thought that these were solid wood cabinets, but these edge pieces all around the sides are veneer. So that's basically gonna make it impossible to sand this down and restain it properly. So we're gonna have to just rethink what we wanna do for the doors, which it's a big bummer because obviously that would have saved us a lot of money to reuse these cabinet doors. So Mike is either gonna need to build new ones, or we will have to order new ones online, or we can paint them, but I feel like I don't want to paint them. I'm pretty much committed to natural wood at this point. I just really am dead set on that. I just love the look, and that's what I was looking forward to. So I did use this to test a couple of stains, and as much as I love a dark, rich, beautiful stain like this, I think it's gonna be a little bit too dark, and this also has like a purpley tint in person that I'm not loving. The camera isn't really picking that up, so I think I'm gonna go with something a little bit more medium. I'm not like crazy about any of these stains. I think that's probably because they turned out really blotchy, because maple is actually a notoriously hard wood to stain. It doesn't accept stain very well, but we are committed to maple, unfortunately, just because that's what the rest of the kitchen is, and we can't afford brand new cabinet boxes. So I'm thinking like maybe something in the middle of these two, because this I like, but it's just way too close to the floors, and I want to have some sort of contrast there. So maybe like a medium walnut color if I can achieve that. So we're gonna just have to come and revisit that later though, because right now we are on such a tight time crunch. We don't have time to stain the doors or to stain any of the pieces in the kitchen. We are days away from moving and nothing's packed, nothing's clean. So we're gonna go clean and focus on moving, and then we will revisit this project later. So my original plan for the cleaning was to hire a service since we were so tight on time, but when I called around to get quotes, it was around $400 to $450, so it would have been nearly $1,000 to clean both our property and the rental. So we decided to just invest in some good cleaning supplies and scrub the places down ourselves. It did take a couple of extra days, but we felt like that was worth it for the money that we saved. I watched a couple of YouTube cleaning videos, which are actually super motivating and educational, and I found some good product recommendations from them. So I just used this Barkeeper's Friend More spray for the showers and tubs, and getting this drill scrubbing attachment saved me a lot of elbow grease, which was nice. And I saw a lot of comments asking about our peel and stick flooring at the rental, and we did text our landlord about 2 weeks before we moved out to see if he wanted us to leave it there or if he wanted us to remove it. And we did receive a response to that text 2 days before we moved out that he wanted us to remove them. So luckily, because we had installed the floor paper first, it was super easy and quick to remove these. The paper prevented the sticky residue from getting on any of the tiles, and they came right up. We even decided to save the full tiles because I had only cut a small piece of the backing around the border so that we could potentially reuse these for another space in our new house. So it was nice to be able to get to recycle and reuse these as well. The only place where we stuck the tiles to the actual floor entirely was around the border, and that was just to keep everything in place. But as you can see, it left a little bit of sticky residue behind. So because we had just this small section to clean, we sprayed some Goo Gone on it, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then we used a Brillo pad to scrub it, and it came right up. And taking up this floor maybe took us 30 minutes in total, which was great. So then we went back to our other house to get it vacuumed and clean so that we could start moving things in the next morning.
Run a few miles down a desert road, stare too long at a 2-foot rose. It's fixing something that's been broken. Go get lost in a little town, get dressed up and just drive around. Get both feet on some solid ground.
So we finished cleaning our place at about 10:30 p.m. and we had to be up really early the next morning to fetch the U-Haul and start loading things up. So we were definitely insanely exhausted at this point, but we were also so excited to start moving our stuff into the house. We did not hire movers and we did everything ourselves, so it took about 3 days in total to get everything all moved over. But we are so excited to start this new chapter in our dream home. Thank you all so much for following along, and make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss my future makeover videos, because obviously there will be a whole new lot of decorating and styling videos coming your way, including a patio makeover. So be sure that your notifications are on so you don't miss that one. I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!